Welcome everyone, where we're going to be talking about your project manager this morning, which is your liver. You've just gone into your second day of detox and your liver is very busy today. It's gone into a different stage of detox. And as it goes through this stage, I'm going to be explaining to you what's happening in your liver. Your liver I call the project manager because on a job site, all the plumbers come to the project manager, the painters come to the project manager. The project manager is orchestrating the job site. So that's what your liver's doing. It's orchestrating the job site, of course, which is the human body. So a few facts on the liver. The liver is the largest internal organ in the body, and the liver is the only organ in the body that has the ability to regrow. And when you understand the liver, when you understand what it does, and it's the role that it plays, you'll understand why God made it so. You see, cancer cannot get a hold on the body if the liver's working in optimum performance. So those pieces of information alone make it a very important that we human beings know something about the house we live in, especially your liver. Your liver is under your right rib, and if it's not happy when you push it, it'll go, don't. Is that right? Very simple test. And you can see that I'm pushing my fingers way up under my ribs there. But I don't have any discomfort at all. If you have any discomfort, no need to fear. You're in a detox and your liver's very happy. Sorry, not very happy because it's very busy. It's very busy helping you to detox. But it'll certainly recover. So what I want to do before I show you what the liver's doing today, I want to show you what it does with everything that comes into the body. So environmental poisons coming into the body, everything goes straight to the liver. And if it's toxic, the liver says, whoa, nasty guy, wrap him up in fat and store him. And if the liver looks at it and says, no, we can break that down to a state that can be easily released, that is what it will do. What about food? Let me show you what it does with the food that comes in. And never in the history of mankind have human beings eaten so many carbohydrates. So we're going to do a carbohydrate assessment. And I want you to tell me what most Americans had for breakfast this morning.
Toast, eggs,
toast. So here we've got bread. Cereal's a very popular one. One lady said egg. Sorry, no one cooks anymore. Is that right?
Donuts.
Donuts. Surely not. And we talked about the healthiest part of the donut, didn't we? Which is the hole in the middle. So we'll say for the donuts, the cakes, you call them biscuits. Do you know what we call biscuits? Cookies. So when we see a sign that says biscuits and gravy, we're thinking, oh, these Americans are strange people. They put gravy on their cookies. But I realise that I think your biscuit is like a scone, like a roll or something like that. So I'm just going to say cakes, etc. So this takes into consideration the donuts, the biscuits, the cakes, the pastries, the pies, all of that. And pizza. When I was a little girl, I didn't know what a pizza was. I don't think I knew what a pizza was till I was about 20. So I'm a baby of the 50s, 60s, so they weren't really around then. Same with pasta. I don't think there's a home today that doesn't have pasta. Would that be right? And rice is another carbohydrate. Potatoes. That's a high carbohydrate food. And last and certainly least in nutritive value is the pure crystallized acid that's extracted from the sugarcane plant. Now, would you agree with me, students, that Americans have become high carbohydrate consumers? Yes. Now, I say become because I don't think anyone chose to eat this way. It was just there, it's just easy. We're such a fast society today, and many people don't think about their lunchtime till they're hungry, or their evening meal till they're hungry. And there's no time to soak the legumes and cook the legumes. There's no time to steam the vegetables. They just want food now. So I think it's something that is just, you could say, evolved. And it's got to the point where these are very popular foods and we are getting the ramifications of that. And people are starting to think, now what's happening here? What's happening here? The first person that blew the whistle on it really was probably in the 80s, Dr. Robert Atkins. You've heard of Dr. Robert Atkins?
Yeah.
Now his book, it hit the press, and it became New York Times best-selling cookbook 4 years running. Wow. The nutritionists and the doctors hated him. Someone loved him. Who loved him? The people. You know why they loved him? It worked. His story is fascinating. He's a GP in his 40s, putting on a bit of weight, and of course that's what this will do. Let me show you why it does it. We'll just take a little, we're going to finish Atkins in a minute, but let me show you. You see, he knew his science. That's why, and the science I'm about to show you. All of these foods break down in the gastrointestinal tract to a singular structure called glucose. Now the glucose goes on the M1 main highway, portal vein, straight to the project manager. And then the project manager determines where this glucose goes. And it'll take it inside the cell. Remember I promised you we'll be going to the CBD every day? So the glucose goes inside the cell. It goes through a 20-step pathway. The 20-step pathway gives us 2 units of energy. Isn't that why we eat? Now the end result of that 20-step pathway is a chemical form of glucose called pyruvate. Pyruvate is the chemical form of glucose that gets fed into the next section of the cell, often called the powerhouse, because this little 8-step pathway delivers to us a whopping 36 units of energy. So the question now arises, why does a 20-step pathway only give us 2 units, and why does an 8-step pathway give us 36 units of energy? The difference is oxygen. This is called an anaerobic pathway. Anaerobic because it doesn't use oxygen. It produces energy by the process of fermentation. That's where a cancer cell lives. Remember what we looked at yesterday? Doesn't like oxygen, consumes 15 times the rate of glucose because it's running up there. Interesting. This pathway is called an aerobic pathway. It's called an aerobic pathway because it uses oxygen. Tomorrow we're going to pursue that. But today we've got to stay on track. We're looking at the journey of glucose. So the first place that the liver will send the glucose, number 1, is to the cell to be burnt as fuel. But on a high carbohydrate diet, you got a lot of glucose left over. And so now the body stores it in what I call the most amazing fuel, quick fuel supply in the body. It's called glycogen. They're little molecules of glucose just sitting in your muscle cell waiting to be used. Do you wonder how you had the energy to exercise this morning? We only gave you broth last night. You only had aloe lemon water this morning, and yet you did it. It's because of your glycogen stores. They're already sitting in your muscle cell, and as soon as you move the body requiring more, they just pluck it through the energy cycle. Pluck another one through the energy cycle. What an amazing process. It actually brings me to that verse in the Bible at Psalm 139 verse 14, where the Bible says, I will praise you, for I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvellous are thy works, and that my soul knows right well. So number 2, the glucose is stored as glycogen. I call glycogen the diabetic's best kept secret. Because if blood sugar goes low, what do? Get on the exercise bike. Release your glycogen stores. In fact, one young man, a diabetic, he said to me, why didn't anyone tell me about glycogen? Now I can understand his frustration because, wow. Let's go back to glucose. So on a high carbohydrate diet, we've still got glucose left over because the cell can only store so much. By the way, the liver stores a little bit, and this glycogen can be sent all over the body, whereas the glycogen that's in the muscle cell, it's like in a prison, it can only be used by the muscle cell. And when you think about it, that's the cell that has probably the most demand on it. So what's the body going to do with the rest? What's the liver going to do with the rest of the glucose? Well, we've got an amazing fuel depot, fuel supply. I call it the basement stores. You know what the basement stores are? They're the fat cells. And what's happening to Americans today? Whew. They're getting bigger and bigger and bigger. When I used to visit my daughter 25 years ago, I could go to a store and buy a small size. Today I have to go to a special section called the petite section. Because 40 years ago, 50 years ago, my size was actually a normal size. It's actually not a normal size today, which is crazy, isn't it? But Australia's up equal with America here. 63% of Australians are obese or overweight. Whew. What's caused that? Here it is. It's the high carbohydrate diet. So the third place that the liver will send that excess glucose is as fat. Now what I've given you here is basic science. I might have mentioned earlier that I like to use the BHSC method: Bible, history, science and common sense. So with history, we've got the history of people who never used to eat a high carbohydrate diet because people used to make what they eat. And that all takes a long time. Mm-hmm. So what did people eat a lot of? Well, Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride, in her book Gut and Psychology, she actually looks at the histories and she said thick vegetable soups was probably one of the most common foods that people ate. You see, the mother would, on her fuel stove, would put it in the corner, and maybe she'd throw a bone or two in there as well, especially if they didn't have a lot of money, but the vegetables are cheap. So historically, people ate, on the whole, a lot of vegetables. And let's go back to even more primitive times when there wasn't refrigeration. If an animal was killed, they would dry a lot of it, they'd have a big feast for a couple of days, but they may not eat meat again for another month. What did they eat? A lot of vegetables, roots, things that they grew. So historically, you can see that. Now we're looking at scientifically. So when people are on this high carbohydrate diet, too much glucose is released. The body can only deal with so much, so it has to be stored in the fat cells. Now, Dr. Robert Atkins knew that science. So he looked at himself getting this, what we call spare tire. So he decided to do an experiment on himself. He decided to stop all carbohydrates. What did he eat? He ate a lot of vegetables, okay? And a lot of people don't realise that, with the exclusion of the potato. So he was eating a lot of fibre. And he knew also that the gastrointestinal tract needed to move through the next two food groups. He ate a lot of meat, butter, cream, cheese, eggs. So there was his protein. And meat, butter, cream, cheese, eggs was also supplying another food group, which was fat. Remember, he just experimented on himself. Few things happened. His weight just fell off. Why? Well, he's not supplying the quick release glucose stores, and so his liver has to start breaking down his fat stores. It's called gluconeogenesis, creating glucose from the fat stores. He was never hungry. Why? Because these are the three food groups that keep the food in the stomach longer. Fibre binds up the glucose and it slowly releases it. Protein, well, protein's broken down specifically in the stomach. And fat, it coats the food a little bit, so it takes a little bit longer to break down. That's good news, because it means we don't have to be eating all day long. We can eat and forget about food for the next 5 or 6 hours. He had heaps of energy. Where's he getting his energy from if he's not giving this quick release glucose foods? Well, as I mentioned, his liver breaks down his fat stores to give him the glucose, and his liver has the ability to break down protein and fat to give glucose. He had lots of energy, weight's falling off him, and he's never hungry. Has he found the perfect diet? Well, the 11 million people that it has been estimated has been helped by his diet agree. #1 on the New York Times best-selling list 4 years running. You know what this information says? This man demands us to have a look because I want to know why. So when I had a man come to our program who said to me, he was a businessman, he said, I know you're not going to like it, Barbara, but I go so well on the Atkins diet. Now, if I'm worth anything, what am I going to do?
Listen.
I'm going to listen. Because this is his body. It works well. I was interested. And I was interested in a way that I'd never been interested before. Because people used to say, oh, that Atkins diet's terrible. Meat, butter, cream cheese, eggs. So I thought, oh, well, I'm not too interested in that. But I became interested in this man. And it's quite a long story. It's a fascinating story how eventually the book came across my path. I opened it. I could not put it down. I read it in 2 days. His science is correct. There's the science. So when Atkins was popular, I used to give a meeting called Dr. Atkins' Missing Link. And his missing link really is the vegetarian protein. I'm jumping ahead. Let's have a look at what he found. So he started to put some of his patients on this. Oh, they were so happy they can eat anything they can't usually eat on a weight loss diet. Weight's falling off them. Within 6 months, he had all his patients on the diet. After a year, a few things started happening which he was unprepared for. His cancer patients were going into remission. How so? Do you remember what cancer cells are consuming? 15 times the glucose of any other cell. This is a low glucose diet. His diabetics were coming off their medication. This is type 1 and type 2 diabetics. Absolutely there was weight loss. You might be surprised at the next one. His patients on with high cholesterol levels came back to normal. And what are they eating? Meat, butter, cream, cheese, eggs. What are people told if they want to get their cholesterol levels down? What have they got to stop? Meat, butter, cream, cheese, eggs. Is that right? He's scratching his head. He only did it for weight loss. And that's why he wrote his book. But before he wrote his book, he went into the medical journals. And he opened once again his anatomy and physiology book that he hadn't looked in for probably about 20 years. And this is what he found, that these 3 food groups are the essential food groups. Why? Remember, we've got to ask why at every step. Well, fibre sweeps the gastrointestinal tract. And if it doesn't get swept every day, it starts to slow down and not work properly. And if the colon doesn't work, the whole body doesn't work. Plus, it is in the fibre part of food, there's often a concentration of the nutrients. Protein's essential. 50% of the membrane around every cell in the body is protein. Remember yesterday we looked at how the new cell is built up with amino acids? My son, James, he inherited my body type. It's hard to put on weight, and that's bad news for a boy because they want to be big. Well, he's big. I can show you a photo of him. He's got muscles now. How did he do that? He worked very hard. He's got his mother's diligence. He just worked at it and worked at it. But he did something else. I was in his room one day and my foot kicked this big bucket. I said, what's that? Oh, that's my protein powder, Mum. Every bodybuilder, if they want to build up muscle, what have they got to add to their diet? Protein, because it's protein that builds muscle. 50% of the membrane around every cell in the body is fat. Whether you're 100 kilos or 300 kilos, I'm talking about the membrane around your cell. Except for the brain cell, it's 70% fat. And that's little fatty sheath around the tail of the cell, that gets your brain cells up to 70%. In fact, the brain's the fattiest organ in the body. And you know what it loves to eat? Fat. We'll have a look at that. What Atkins found is that the non-essential food group is carbohydrates. This surprised him. Now let me define that. I'm not saying carbohydrates are bad. I'd be a fool to do that. We love them. We enjoy them. They're not bad. They only pose a problem when they're overdone and refined. Got that? Notice the 2 words, overdone and surely on the high carbohydrate diet. It's a little bit overdone, isn't it? And refined, because most people that are on this diet, it's refined. But you can still overdo the unrefined carbohydrate. So because of that, your carbohydrate part of your meal is your negotiating part of the meal. And the negotiations change depending on your height, depending on your size, depending on your age, depending on your physical and mental output through the day. But probably most, it would depend on your health status. So if someone wanted to lose weight quickly, safely, drastically, what would they severely eliminate? The carbs. Someone wanted to conquer cancer, what would they quite drastically drop? The carbs. Someone wanted to conquer their diabetes, what would they drop? The carbs. Someone wanted to put on weight. This is a trick question. How did James put on weight? Yeah, you don't increase the carbs, because I don't know anyone that wants to get fat. In fact, what we find, and we found this last week, that our overweight people lost weight. Our underweight people put on a little bit, and our people who were the right weight, they just stayed the same, and they're all eating the same food. The Bible says, prove all things and hold fast to that which is good. People say to me, Barbara, do you ever step sideways? Do you ever have a little bit of junk? I said, why would I do that? I feel so good. I sleep well. I like the results. So notice what the Bible says, prove all things and hold fast to that which is good. In other words, do it and just keep at it. How can you do it though on a vegetarian diet? Let's have a look. And we're going to go to Genesis 1:29, where God's telling Adam and Eve what to eat. Because I don't think you can improve on the Garden of Eden diet. Let's have a look at it. In Genesis 1:29, God says, behold, I've given you every herb-bearing seed which is upon the face of the earth. We're going to have a look at the food, we're going to have a look at the protein content and the carbohydrate content. God says, behold, I've given you every herb-bearing seed. So what's a seed? That would be grain. A seed would be legume, like often called the beans. And a seed would also be seed. So let's look at grain. You've got wheat, rye, barley, oats, amaranth, buckwheat, quinoa, so many, rice, so many grains. They are high in protein, but they are also high in carbohydrates. So let's glance over at our carbohydrate list. How many of these are from grain? So we've got grain, grain, grain. We could say grain, 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 because all the cake section. Grain, grain, grain. The majority of our carbohydrate list is from the grain department. What's a legume? That's your chickpeas, lima beans, black-eyed beans, cannellini beans. Well, you call them black-eyed peas, don't you? Lentils, soy. They are high in protein, but interesting to note that they are medium to low in carbohydrate.
Wow.
That is interesting, because if you go to the modern Atkins books, which is your keto diet, your ketogenic diet, your paleo diet, they will say don't eat legumes because they have carbohydrates. Well, they do, but not a lot. Only a third what you will find in the grain. What about seed? You've got pumpkin seed, sesame seed, sunflower seed, chia seed, flaxseed or linseed. These seeds are high in protein, but they are quite low in carbohydrate. So God said, behold, I've given you every herb-bearing seed which is upon the face of the earth, and every tree. In the which of the trees a fruit-bearing seed? What's a fruit-bearing seed? There's your nut. All your nuts come from the fruit of the tree. And we've got, you say pecan, we say pecan, walnuts, cashew, Brazil, hazelnut, almond, so many nuts. And the nuts are high in protein, but quite low in carbohydrate. So to ensure you're getting your three essentials, the fibre, protein and fat, my suggestion is you increase the legume, nut, seed part of the meal and decrease the grain part of the meal. That's an easy way to do it. You can see why Atkins' diet was so popular. You can see why the paleo diet's so popular. But what comes into the equation also is Dr. Colin Campbell's book, China Study, where he shows that he could switch cancer cells on and off by the amount of meat and dairy products he was giving to the rats. There's hardly a meat that is safe today because of the way they're fed, because of the way they're killed, because of the way they're stored. It makes it so much easier on the vegetarian diet.